Very delighted and honored on this episode of Words, Images, and Worlds to be talking with comics creator, prolific person in the world of visual reading materials, Mr. Richard Pace. May I call you Richard? Is that okay?
I prefer Richard, yes.
All right, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for talking with me for a few minutes today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I believe I've interrupted your drawing. I believe you were
No,
fully engaged.
I'm always fully engaged in my drawing. What happened is like I discussed earlier, is I set alarms on my phone to bully me around what things I have to do by certain times.
Mhm, mhm.
And as soon as you sent me I'm seeing it now. I don't know what I did on it, but I set an alarm on my phone for 1 o'clock today for the meeting, and it didn't go off. So
It works. It works. I'm glad you're here. I
yeah.
was going to ask about, I know you probably can't share the details of what you're working on at the moment, but just curious, what's currently inspiring you on the page?
Right now in front of me are finishing off the layouts for a Conan novel
Oh,
that
lovely.
Heroic Blast Titan's putting out.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a big. No, do I have it? No, I just have my notes here. I hate working from digital. Like occasionally I'll read a digital book,
Mhm.
but I hate needing one of those as reference. So I printed out the whole damn thing. It's like a 500-page novel. I printed out the whole thing over at my local Staples, and I went through and I made no. I had because have you ever done any illustration briefs at all in your career?
No, no, I haven't. I wish. I wish.
All right. So the premise is, and I wish all the note stuff were in the other room right now. Um, assign, as a book assignment, I'll get a copy of the manuscript most of the time,
Hmm.
and then I'll get um, 4 to whatever number of illustration prompts, and they'll refer to a specific page and what subject they want me to do an illustration based on.
Hmm. Hmm.
But a lot of times, those characters that are in that sequence, they're described like 10, 20 pages earlier,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, that info is not enough unless I'm doing such a generic level of design for the whole book that it doesn't matter. And this book, it kind of matters. So it's like, I'd read about half of it on my desktop, and I'm like, I hate reading like this. Printed out, went through, and I got like so many post-it notes through this whole book, and it's like I color coded them. Okay, so like illustration A is pink, so all my notes referring to illustration A are these little pink tab notes
Uh-huh.
going through the
Uh-huh.
manuscript, and then illustration B is like pale blue, so I do pale blue, and eventually you run out, so then you have to start doing like letter tabs, like this is B, right, pink B
Hmm.
type of
Hmm.
thing. And I find that it's part of the process. It slows you down at the beginning because you're reading. I know so many artists who never read manuscripts,
Yeah.
and I was sitting down next to someone at a convention like many years ago, and I had just got another assignment, just for a role playing company, and I had like all the briefs with me because I figured if it was a slow con, I'd do some work.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
goes, "Well, you read the manuscript, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." Well, what do you do? I said, "I draw, and if there's something I'm missing, they tell me to add it. And if there's something added that's not supposed to be there, they tell me to take it away." And I'm like,
Interesting.
"That has got to be the laziest approach." And I get how it works. He just makes the editor catch his mistakes, and I'm like, I prefer not to make them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, and then you have to go in and redo and take things out and put things in. That just seems.
Well, Well, if it's especially if it's a big thing like a compositional element that you're relying on, and
Hmm.
suddenly it's gone, and you're just like, well, I have to start over from scratch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get that there's a certain generic approach to a lot of fantasy, science fiction, horror type stuff, especially horror. Um, but to just take an assignment and not consider understanding the assignment is part of the job.
Yeah.
I never understood that. Never understood that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time that you put into it by all means. You've been working in comics and creating for quite some time. And I certainly have my favorite titles, but I'm curious, who are the best people that you've worked with? Who are some of the most positive collaborations that have been, really kind and fruitful?
Um, it's always easiest to lean into that super sense of positivity and say the current people I'm working with are the best people I'm working with. But in
Right,
many
right.
ways, it's true. This is the first time that working with a writer, we're working Marvel style on this Savage Sword of Conan story I'm doing for issue 2 of the new relaunch.
Hmm, hmm.
And Jim wrote a Marvel style plot. And because
Nice.
Jim Zub is local to me and we're in the same gaming group, I just showed up early a couple of days in a row, and we went. I just did layouts with him,
Oh
and
wow.
the back and forth. We ended up coming up with so much more just talking back and forth as we went through than if I just did my usual old like Marvel style break it down. Here's the storytelling. Here I added some punchy bits.
Hmm, hmm.
It's just so that was a truly best of writer experience with me. I think before that you have to go to James Robinson and
Hmm.
Starman. I mean, there's been some good collaborations over the years, but in terms of a whole issue, I mean, it wasn't just because it was James Robinson; it's because Archie Goodwin was a part of it,
Yeah.
and that's how I got to meet Archie, and that was good. That was good. So yeah,
Yeah.
those are probably the two best highlights, I guess.
Nice, nice. I had Jim Zub on a few episodes ago, and just a very kind person, and clearly knows his stuff, talking about the Conan lore.
Oh
Yeah,
God, yeah. It's so amazing sitting down with him, and it's like he'll half remember something, and I'll remember the other half. I'll half remember something, he'll remember it because I've Conan's a big part of why I'm doing comics, which
yeah,
is weird. Because along the way, I fell in love with Vertigo, and I thought, well, I'm just going to be a Vertigo guy because at the time Marvel was doing such a terrible job with Conan.
yeah.
Um, I just didn't want to be a part of that, and then now Vertigo's gone, and I'm doing Conan.
Hey, it all comes around. It all comes
It
around.
works out. It works out. Drawing this big is weird
Yeah, yeah.
because it's a magazine sized comic. I'm drawing to scale to the 8.5 by 11 sheet, so that the pages are. Sure, anything. I've had some stuff online. Here we go. Here's a page I've been working on now with streaming, so it's just
Oh
huge.
wow.
I mean, your
Yeah.
standard comic page. Do I have one? Here's standard 8.5 by 11, sorry 11 by 17 sheet. So that it fits. Your standard full comic sheet fits inside the art area
Wow. Yeah.
for this. So it's yeah, it's fun. It's fun though. Working that big and that different. I'm using the whole arm a lot more instead of like drawing with the wrist. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah,
So
cool. Now you have, as I mentioned, a history in the medium and uh, particular stories and story types that kind of bubble up from time to time. Like Pitt, of course, comes to mind. Doom that came to Gotham, which is one of my favorite. Elseworlds. There we go. Stories. I'm curious about the kind of story that captures you, that grabs you, sort of the space that you like to create in.
well, I've always been a horror guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Um I think the biggest transformational experience for me as a comics fan. Because I mean, as a kid, I was aware of Spider-Man and Batman and all that stuff. And if you do a family road trip, you always got that big poly bag full of comics from Kmart.
Hmm, hmm.
And so you ended up reading one of these giant sizes, which would have like a 1930s era Batman story, and you go, "What the hell was this?" So someone was saying. So I was very hyper aware of superhero comics, and because of Savage Sword, which my first exposure to it was an issue standing in my local Max Milk in Winnipeg when I was growing up. And I was like looking at this cover of Conan being attacked by these satyrs,
Hmm,
and I'm like,
hmm.
what the hell is going on in that book? And I pick it up, and it's John Buscema drawings, and I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. So that turned me to super Conan head. I was reading the Robert E. Howard stuff that was out at the time and everything. But I think the biggest experience when I decided that I really should make a go of it as a comic artist, because that's what Frank Frazetta did before he became Frank Frazetta.
Hmm, hmm.
And a friend of mine said, have you read Swamp Thing? And I've heard of it. I remember some of those gorgeous comics when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
But oh no, it's a very different thing now because Alan Moore had been writing it for like 4 or 5 issues at this point.
Hmm.
And so I managed to snag all those comics like right away on one swoop because they're all in the stands yet. People hadn't caught on. And I was like the anatomy lesson
Oh
and
yeah.
even just looking for Arcane's body in the issue before. No, but just no, sorry, not the soldiers finding Swamp Thing's body in the issue before, which is kind of like the transitional issue that no one ever talks about,
Hmm.
and just the level of play of language and the relationship to words and pictures there, I just kind of went, oh, you can do this? You can
Yeah.
do this in comics? And in rapid succession, as I'm like, this is when I'm becoming a comic lover. Um, uh, Frank Miller's doing Born Again.
Hmm.
Um, and about to do Year One with Mazzucchelli. Dark Knight Returns is about to come out. V for Vendetta, Watchmen. Alan Moore had all these short stories to show up everywhere. Howard Chaykin's American Flag,
Hmm.
Cerebus at the time. There was so 11 Rockets. There were so many things for like 15, 16-year-old kid to be looking at and going, oh my God, how were comics always just like crappy Green Lantern stories before?
Right. Right.
And now they're like everything. I mean, it's like going from like, being disappointed that, ostensibly Green Lantern's always been kind of like my favorite superhero,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I enjoy a Green Lantern story. I love the concept. I just find the execution with the character so terrible everywhere. Um, because it's like he's a space cop. Sorry if I'm digressing, but he's a
No, you're
space cop,
fine. You're fine.
and just I was like, I was never a great science student, but I was a great science reader.
Hmm.
So I was thinking about all the weird anomalies that we are just beginning to understand in our at the time in the 80s about space and reading Carl Sagan and all that stuff. It's like being a space cop would be the most bizarre, borderline hallucinogenic experience anyone could have.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I remember one time I was talking to this is early 90s, then assistant Green Lantern era, and I explained, it's like, well, what do they do when they're traveling across vast distances? He says, well, no, it's Green Lantern. He just goes there. I said, no, that's not how it works. Right. And he just looked at me and he goes, what do you care? It's not real science. I'm saying, well, you're dropping the ball then. I
Yeah.
mean, what makes Green Lantern unique if it's not the fact he's a space cop? He said, well, it's more like Aladdin in the lamp. And I said, well, then he's no better than any of your other heroes. There's nothing unique to him anymore.
Yeah.
Well, you got the Guardians. He started defending Green Lantern based on the science fantasy tropes
Uh-huh.
that were around for Buck Rogers and everything. I'm saying, it's like, yeah, but you're not using anything to make it real now. I
Hmm.
think I gave up for good during Jeff Johns' run because he had some glimmers of potential, but he seemed more interested in ripping off old Alan Moore ideas and actually doing something cool, moving Green Lantern forward.
Hmm.
At that point, I quit. People will go, "Oh, it's a great Green Lantern run." I go, "The bar is so low to me." Oh, 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 oh. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, but
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Oh my God, and Alan Moore's Green Lantern stories. Let's go there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And pretty much everything he did, everything Howard Chaykin had done at that point, Hernandez brothers. I mean, they're still producing amazing work now.
Hmm.
Uh, and they've paved the way for so many new voices to come along and just do amazing things. I'm really terrible at younger writers, more recent writers' names. Like there's Tom King, he does good work.
Hmm. Hmm.
Who did the Abominable Hulk run?
Is
With all
that
the Alex Ross stuff.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's his name's on the tip of my tongue. He's a great guy. He's done some really really artful stuff.
Jim
Um,
Rugg, is that Jim Rugg?
no, he did the retelling the whole history of it. That big um
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the big. I'm thinking of it had all the Alex Ross covers, so that would be
I will.
Oh my God. I just shelved them all too because I finally got them all together. Um, anyway, it's creatively outside of Marvel and DC, comics have never been more alive.
Yeah.
And I never would have thought that I would go a year without buying a Marvel or DC book sometimes.
Yeah.
And you just kind of realize it's like, and then some, when you buy them, you kind of like, I picked up that really beautiful Gargoyle of Gotham book.
Hmm.
Oh my God, I love that guy's work. The comic book is terrible, but boy, is it pretty.
It is
Boy,
a
is it
it is a
pretty.
really
I like that they're
visually
trying
stunning
to do
book.
something new.
Yeah.
I like that they're trying to do something new, but it's kind of weird if they're trying to get something new from the writer's end. When they're writing for DC or Marvel, it seems like they're writing for TV.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
not writing good comics. They're writing TV comics. And so there hasn't been a good Batman read since. I'm trying to think of the last time I enjoyed a good Batman comic.
It's a moment. It's a moment's
It,
pause.
it's, I mean, I liked Doom That Came to Gotham,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I might be biased on that. That tried something different around 20 some odd years ago.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
got to be. There was a pretty good one with when they revealed that Gordon had a son
Hmm.
and he was crazy. I think it's called the Black Coffin or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I know
So
the one of which
it,
you
it had
speak.
it had moments in it. Um, but then you realize that all the good stuff, and this has almost always been true. All the good stuff comes from the edges,
Hmm. Hmm.
where editorial's not paying attention. It's like, well, yeah, no one really cares about Swamp Thing. The guy who created it kind of cares about it because he's editing it still. So let's bring in this British guy. Who cares? And
Right.
suddenly, Swamp Thing's like probably one of the most enduring evergreen books DC's ever published. And they only let you do something interesting like that with a main character is if you're Frank Miller and you've already established you set the world on fire with everything you touch.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, Ronan underperformed, but it was creatively spectacular. So
Yeah.
it's like it was kind of like, well, we got the A-list actor from that studio to do this movie that he really wanted to do. It didn't do great, but now we can get him to do like a James Bond movie, and
Hmm.
we know
Hmm.
James Bond's going to make a lot of money. So then he does Dark Knight, and DC. I mean, this is comics culture in general. DC's then marketing guy sent out a warning email to all the retailers, cautioning them not to over too heavy on Dark Knight because remember Ronin. I mean, it's like this story got told to me. I was sitting at it was a post convention experience. I was sitting right across from Will Eisner, which was an experience,
I'm
and a whole
sure.
bunch of other people. And Will started defending the company, which is something you eventually realize Will always
Hmm.
did. And I just kind of went, okay, so I'm Frank Miller, and I'm doing this big deal Batman book. And the guy in charge of helping sell the book as much as possible because I get royalties on it is
Right.
telling retailers not to order too heavily on it.
Yeah.
And Will's like, well, no, the company's got to take care of the retailers because that's the longer term relationship. I said, yeah, no, your bigger relationship is with the people creating your books,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
right? So if you're stabbing your creator in the back, saying that we're going to try and reduce your royalty artificially by reducing the print run in the first run,
Yeah.
and to also find out they already knew they were going to have to do a second printing, so pushing more sales to a second printing would actually pay out less to Frank,
Wow.
right? And I didn't know that at that time. I found that out later. But at the time, I said, no. I think if I was Frank Miller, I'd say, well, you know what? Let's renegotiate the back end here, that so that if you do multiple printings, I get my
Hmm.
royalty starting from copy one,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Because you got some guy out there sabotaging my sales.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
I don't know if Frank Miller at that time probably could have like been the tail wagging the dog enough at that point because everyone knew Dark Knight was just going to be the biggest thing ever. And to have someone actually at DC essentially crapping on it while they're trying to sell it, not a good look.
No,
And
definitely
it's
not.
and Marvel and DC have done that again and again and again and again. They put what they perceive as their corporate best interests far ahead of the books.
Uh, well, and then who's making your stuff, you know, if you're stabbing your creators in the back.
Well, there's the attitude is, and they're not entirely wrong, is that there's always people young and hungry enough to take the job.
Mm,
I mean, it's this is a cruder turn of it, but I basically said at some point Marvel's going to say, which creator's willing to eat the most shit to work for us?
mm-hmm.
And you look at the lines of books, they can occasionally put out a really pretty book.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally put, but you know that creative team isn't going to stay there visually because Marvel's going to move them off at some point.
Right.
They have all these weird internal rules about, how much we can afford to pay an artist on a book. So each book has to have a return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't put an expensive artist on a B or C tier list book
Mm.
in hopes of increasing sales because he or she is already too expensive to start.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
It
Yeah.
it yeah. And so when you see, oh God, it's every week now. It seems like comics are dying is a new spin on the old narrative. Comics are dying,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone's definition of comics are dying is how well Marvel and DC is doing, and they almost don't matter.
Yeah.
We're on the cusp of them not mattering. There's retailers out there, and rightly so. They know their bottom line. They know how much of their orders and their discounts are tied to Marvel DC sales numbers,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So when I say they almost don't matter, I don't mean that they don't mean economic. If they disappeared to be economic damage, of course there would be. But what's happening now is they're increasingly making themselves irrelevant.
Yeah.
Any comic shop that survives from now to 3 years from now, if Marvel and DC continues to shrink it the way they do, the retailer that exists 3 years from now is going to be less dependent on Marvel and DC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the less dependent retailers are on Marvel and DC, the less power Marvel and DC has to move sales. We're at
Yeah.
the point now where Marvel DC can still kind of bully a book into higher sales. Through talking, finagling, offering slightly higher discounts of returnability.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not investing in the creators well enough to make the books worth being bullied over. And the
Mm-hmm.
longer that goes on, I mean, it's like the big announcements for Marvel now are which editors are moving around.
Right.
Because I mean, apart from Jason Aaron and I didn't actually want to say Jason Aaron. I wanted to say Hickman. That's who I wanted to say. Sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah, Jonathan Hickman. Yeah.
Apart from Hickman and one or two other writers who can write, Marvel doesn't seem to have anyone able to move a needle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's the theory that Mark Millar, all this nonsense where he's flirting with the alt right and everything,
Yeah.
is largely his preamble to go back to Marvel or DC, which doesn't make sense to me. He has more to lose at that point.
Right. Right.
But what is Marvel doing other than keeping IP alive for the next movie or TV series?
Yeah. And it has to be more than that.
It has to. Well, it has to. I mean, it's like imagine. I can imagine if your job has been getting those books out, and it's been your job for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter, right? You're probably tired, and you're just marking time till retirement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But imagine if you came in and said, "I want to make books that people are going to read," and you're at Marvel, and you're not allowed to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I've heard this secondhand, so I don't know if it's true. But someone pitched an idea at a summit, and they're told that's too close to what they might be doing in a year or two in the movies, so we can't do it. And like the movies are largely predicated on stuff that's already been done in the comics.
Yeah.
So I would say greenlight everything, no matter how bizarre. I would rather lose readers over doing something too experimental,
Mm-hmm.
over losing readers doing something terribly safe on so many levels, so that it is essentially baby food.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the bigger issue with comics these days and any other politics or anything. It's the fear of offending specific groups, apart from groups who are going to look for reasons to be offended.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual fear of offending anyone is having greater interference with the effect of any creative honesty in the books. The
Yeah.
books they lack integrity. I mean, who really cares what happens to characters that aren't going to be in any book 6 months from now?
Right. Or
I
that
mean,
get reset.
yeah. I mean, because I believe the whole Hickman X-Men run experiment's done now. Like the whole Krakoa,
Mm-hmm.
infinite clones of X-Men thing. I think that has that ground down. It's been about 4 years now. That's
Yeah.
usually the cycle of how they. So all that's gone. So now the new writers have to come in and explain away the last 4 years
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
try and tell new X-Men stories. But the X-Men's been going on pretty much nonstop since the late 70s,
Yeah.
apart from the reprint era. So we're talking 50 years of nonstop comics, often with 2 to 4 books a month on the stands dealing with the main continuity of the X-Men. Where do you have room for new?
Right.
Where, where,
Right.
where do you have room for new unless you let the creators go crazy places?
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of this is part of what's driving creators to other companies, Kickstarters, those sort of their own projects and their own things.
Yeah, it's. I remember at one point I had this ghostwriter story I wanted to do for a long time, and it felt like a ghostwriter story. So I just eventually Marvel will let me do this ghostwriter story.
Mm.
I made the mistake of telling it to a friend writer of mine, and he goes, "You can't do that with anyone else." I was thinking, well, I was going to do it on my own, but this guy's a big enough deal. I said, "Okay, if you get Marvel to say yes to it, let's work on it." Comes back to me like about 2 weeks later, and he says, Marvel will not do any stories that touch on actual heaven or hell anymore. They're too afraid of pissing off people."
Interesting.
So
And,
there was that weird run where Ghost Rider went to heaven and hell. They'll
mhm.
never do that again. They'll never do that again.
Huh. And
And that,
the phrase actual heaven or hell is an interesting one too.
well, because if you dig down, I remember reading one of those articles years ago where they kind of established that Jesus Christ doesn't really exist in the Marvel universe.
Hmm.
All right, it was a real. I went, why don't they? And it's so clear that the people doing the comics weren't thinking that deep, but they haven't done a story that established that Christianity is real.
Hmm.
They have all these supernatural.
Oh, you muted there. Sorry, I don't know how that happened.
No, a
You're
call
back.
coming in. I just said that.
You're
All
back.
right, good. Yeah, so they've done all these supernatural things about the history of the Marvel universe, but that's it. And then you go to DC where they actually have angels,
Hmm.
and they have a creation moment that's been in a couple of their comic books. But they're vague enough. Apart from the Spectre and the Spectre talking about God, and I believe what was the name of the angel that actually joined the JLA at one point? Not Azrael, because that was the anti-Batman guy. Actually got her own book at one point. You're probably remembering vaguely what I'm talking about.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
the Grant Morrison thing. But I mean, so it's like DC has God, the being that the Spectre serves, and it actually has heaven and hell because that's Swamp Thing annual.
Hmm. Hmm.
But Marvel doesn't.
Interesting. Yeah.
And unless they change something recently, I remember there was like they've done some weird in the good way stories. Like I mean, Wolverine's established as an atheist in the books,
Hmm.
but then Nightcrawler, a friend of mine gave me the comic. That's how we know this story. Nightcrawler gave Wolverine piano to deliver to a monastery atop a mountain. And if I remember correctly, they've already established that Wolverine's gone to hell at this point, right? So he's actually been in Marvel's hell, but
Uh-huh.
they do the story to kind of go, oh, maybe Nightcrawler's maybe he believes in God. That's not a terrible thing, right? And like I'm going like, what?
Right.
I mean, even in a story where it's like, okay, you have a character who's gone to hell, come back. So if he was going to convert, it would have been upon seeing Mephisto or something, right?
Hmm.
But also Wolverine's seen aliens and alien gods, so it's like maybe he just goes more shit to say. But dragging a piano to the top of a mountain kind of made him go, hmm. I mean,
Yeah,
it's comics, man.
it's comic.
There's a reason why I think all the good stuff is being done outside of Marvel or DC right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, glad to celebrate your work and looking forward to the work that is coming on Conan. Anything that you want to mention as far as a milestone, any particular titles, characters, and collaborative experiences before we drop? I've got about 5 more minutes on my Zoom, and then I have to.
All right. Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, true. I tend to digress a lot.
No, you're
Just
good.
about this.
It's interesting.
We're about to start the fourth arc of Second Coming.
Yes,
Work is
yeah, Mark
starting,
Russell.
and
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah, with Ahoy Comics and Leonard Kirk and Andy Troy. He does colors on Leonard's work. Yeah, so it's volume four. Um, if you've been following the series, you know we left off in a very weird spot with arc three,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it just gets stranger. This is um for a series. I was asked when I was asked about this book first time because something else I was supposed to do fell through. Believe it or not, Conan, but at Dark Horse, I got asked by my editor for this project, would I like to be a part of the next Preacher?
Hmm.
And of course.
Right, right.
And reading the then I think third draft of the first issue of Second Coming, I was like, this ain't Preacher. This ain't Preacher at all. And it was different and everything. And people were getting upset about it and they haven't read it. And I read the issue and I knew it was really safe. It was a
Hmm.
real safe first issue. Um, and so I kind of pushed things in that first issue. Like the Mark made a typo and made the trees of knowledge of good and evil.
Uh,
And
uh,
that's I decided, well, I'm going to gender the trees. One's going to be male, one's going to be female, and the fruit's going to have similar genital gendering.
hmm.
Um, and to me, that just felt like a natural joke for like a Preacher successor.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
The pushback I got on that, and it was that I got pushback at Vertigo. Technically, I got pushback from DC, but they weren't going to fight too hard with it because I just said no, that's joking the book,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Then we went over to Ahoy, and I think the joke made Mark really nervous
Yeah,
because
yeah.
he's a very gentle, sensitive guy. He's really caring. He doesn't want to just offend to people for offense sake. But he asked Tom, our editor on the book at the time at Ahoy. So Tom asked me. I said, I really think everyone's so upset, and we have so many defenders of this book, and none of them have read it. If our defenders of our book get the book and there isn't at least one joke they understand why the religious right would be offended, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
feel disappointed. And Tom went, you know what? I think you're right. So, and then it comes out, and it seemed like I didn't read many reviews, but I read a handful of reviews, and every single one of them mentioned that joke.
Uh-huh.
I went, all right, run solid ground. Yeah. So
Those are the ingredients.
those are the ingredients.
Well, Richard, great to talk with you. I feel like we could do a second part of our episode at some point, if you're up
Absolutely.
for it sometime. Um,
Sure.
yeah, thanks for taking the time, and I will make sure to share this back with you. once I
All
get it
right.
all edited and put together. So
All right. Sounds great.
I will let you return to your Conan pages, and once more
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much. You have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much.